Yes.
Hello, I'm Richard Hale, and I'm joined today by Andrew Gibbons. Andrew is a passionate advocate of learning, adult learning, and work-based learning. And I'm going to have a discussion, Andrew, about the subject of particularly continuing professional development, or CPD, as it's called. And interested to hear your views on this. And maybe we just start off with a sort of, some opening thoughts from you on, why is CPD important?
Well, it's a good job we got 4 hours for this, Richard, because my answers are never short on this, but I will try and keep them tight. Why is CP important? I guess for me, if I condense it down, it's the true mark of a professional. People who passed exams, in my case, decades ago and gained professional body membership, of which we're proud and earned, that was a snapshot in time. In my case, I finished my professional qualifications in 1985. So for me, CPD is important because it's a demonstrable, tangible, evidenced means by which people say, I haven't stopped learning, I haven't stopped deliberately improving my professional practice, and I don't judge myself a professional purely on what I did decades ago.
Okay, so that's interesting. Does that mean, if we look at the words and the words continuing professional development and what you said about your experience as a professional and once you qualified and beyond, is this something that is essentially for the professions, CPD?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it is in a way, because we should be compliant, we professionals, of which there are 10, 15 million with crossover professions in the country. A lot of engineers are professionals in 5 or 6 areas. So there are a heck of a lot of professional people out there. So yes, it's a compliance procedure at heart. We are required to do CPD. I don't know of a professional body, and I know many, that doesn't have an explicit policy on enforcing CPD. So we professionals should be doing what it takes to comply with, very often, the unenforced codes of practice of professional bodies.
Okay, so those are quite strong words. The words, enforcement and compliance. And, that then is how you see, that's the heart of CPD, that's why we do it?
I think it could be seen that way by a lot of people. I'm a bit different to most in that I treat that requirement, and I'll go as strong as to say that word, requirement of membership, continued membership of professional body. I see that as a very positive, empowering thing, and therefore engage in it very actively. I suspect there are many more people than me that see it as an irritating, easily bypassed process that really they'd rather not be bothered with, because all they are is a passive member of a club which they joined decades before and don't want to do anything afterwards.
Well, yes, interesting. I mean, I've certainly noticed in some of the longer standing professions, thinking of, say, law and accountancy, the focus in terms of compliance and requirements of its members is often that they should attend a certain number of courses, and the way that their compliance is measured tends to be in the number of hours that they've attended certain events. Is that is that how you've observed it as well?
Well, absolutely. I agree. I recognise that, and I recognise it in certain bodies. And let's be honest, it's a difficult thing to manage CPD, the process, within a professional body. I understand that. I'm critical of professional bodies. I have been for decades, but I'm critical in a critical friend mode, I like to think, because I understand and empathise with the difficulties of balancing the continued quality of the learning and development of the existing membership with the need to get subs. If you get that balance wrong and you say, okay, membership, we're going to really make it tough for you. We're going to be the professional body that leads the way in this, and you're really going to have to pull your finger out and do CPD and show us, or we'll boot you out. Well, a lot of people would say, I'm not having that. I'm going to buy a holiday with what it costs my subs, and they'd go. So you can take You can be too hard on people or too soft and say, okay, everyone, we so want to protect our cash and not frighten you away. We're not going to lean on you to do CPD. So it's a difficult balance for a professional body. And yes, I recognize a lot of professional bodies take what I consider to be the easy route, the input route, to say this number of hours, these number of training courses. You can go on this pre-accredited program because they're on our list, because they pay us money, and therefore you'll get your points in. I think that's nonsense. I can sit on a chair all day for 5 days and get my points and text away and book my holidays. But I think if we can ever again, we're talking midst of a pandemic here. In other words, I don't have to physically and actively do anything. And that's madness. But I understand why it happens, because those professional bodies don't do things random. They do it because that's the way they feel they can do the best they can to maintain standards.
Sure. I think, so I can relate to this in that I think part of the challenge is, how can we make CPD meaningful? And I look at, other professions. Certainly I see it in the traditional professions, a focus is on, being able to deal with high numbers, as you say. So there's an economic and a political kind of, and a compliance aspect
for goodness sake, there's hundreds of thousands of people in nursing professions.
Yeah. And, in some of these professions, there is a kind of legal requirement to stay up to date with the latest.
It's a license to practice, Richard. If you're in the electricals, for instance, if you're a clinician in many fields, obviously, but in other fields, it's discretionary. It's not a license to practice, and it's harder to take a more output oriented quality of activity over quality of input.
Yeah, and the difficulty with making CPD output driven is the outputs are by definition likely to be different for every individual.
They are.
I would favour the approach, and in fact I did try to introduce that once when I was working with a bank, and we had been running leadership programs which were based on outputs, very much an action learning based program.
Absolutely.
And I introduced, I brought 4 of the accounting institutes along to look at the work that we'd been doing and how we'd been doing it. And they were interested in how these accountants working in a corporate role had done some very meaningful learning and development around their own capability as professional accountants. And they were reporting the outputs and presenting the outputs. And I remember at the time asking some of the institutes, do you think this counts as CPD? Could this count? And actually, interestingly, quite a few of them actually said, oh yes, this looks really good. This should count, so they can make reference to it when they fill in their forms. And they talk about their CPD, even though it wasn't on the sort of the pre-list, if you like. And my kind of, I was quite optimistic back then that we might be able to influence some of these professional bodies to actually change their approach to CPD. I tried to do a similar thing in Australia with an accounting institute there, but it never really kind of followed through. And I suspected it was to do with exactly what you've been talking about, the kind of the organizational pressure of the institutes, and the the requirement to deal with very high numbers of people, and to therefore create a system which becomes mechanistic, actually.
And process becomes the preordinate issue over quality of individual. It's very difficult to genuinely impact the individual specific unique needs of one person over another when there's hundreds of thousands of members. It disappoints me sometimes that I see, and have seen for many years, so little effort to even try to do so.
The teaching is another good example, isn't it? I've seen it with groups of teachers that I've often met at the end of the week at the bar or the pub, and actually they start to offload their kind of pain and problems that they've experienced during the week, and their observations of some of the flaws within their schools. I'm external, but just there as a friend, and I'm kind of thinking, well, you've actually got some of the answers here.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about, and I've actually challenged them sometimes. I said, well, why don't you suggest, your, improvements
Yep. Yep.
or raise these to the principal or to the head? And they're so sort of constrained by the culture, which
I
is
know.
not
I
about
know.
reporting these things upwards and coming
Well,
up
I
with
think
these
there are
ideas.
things we can do, Richard. I think the things that, I mean, I don't just rant about these things. I do rant about them. I've ranted about them since the 80s. But I do also look to make suggestions to at least think about alternative ways to make it more meaningful. The trouble is, let's be straight, professional bodies is what this is really ultimately all about. We use the word professional, we use the word continuing professional development, where by definition, meaning that that's in the context of professional activity and professional bodies that govern that. So this is about professional bodies. So I personally would like to see something quite radical. I would like to see in my own professional body, which is the, Ben not mention it, I would like to see a differentiation between people who are active CPDers from those that are not. I would have liked, and that opportunity's gone, chartered membership to have been withheld from people until they can show a continuous process, maybe reviewing every couple of years, 3 years. All these things carry cost and resource implications, of course they do, but at least some means by which you can differentiate the haven't done a thing for 30 years, no, try and boot me out people, from the, hey, I'm engaged in this, I believe in it, I'm making it work for me. They say, very well done, good stuff too, we won't be looking at you then, cheerio. And if we had a register of people, whereby employers, for instance, could look at people and say, you're on the list of people who can be bothered to do what others aren't. That would differentiate practice. You wouldn't be taking things away from people who don't engage, because I don't think that's the way to do it. You wouldn't be penalizing people, but you'd be giving added value to people who engage positively, tangibly, and therefore show that they're not just in the I don't know what I'm trying to say here, they don't just believe in the ethos, they're doing something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, isn't this partly about sort of changing the game or moving the game on so that people are doing meaningful CPD because they actually want to do
Yes.
it, so that
Yes.
the motivator, the driver for it,
Yes.
comes from them,
Yes.
rather
Agree.
than that they have to do it in order to comply or to.
And the peculiar thing is that when you engage in it and do it meaningfully, when you actually see CPD as a genuine enhancer of your, not just professional practice, but of your, if you like, your competency in a broader sense, in your employability, these are important key factors. This is why I find it so peculiar. And the other odd thing is that the easy way to administer CPD is the more costly. Saying to accountants, clinicians, lawyers, and so on, go on these expensive, typically London-based programs, make your people sit on a chair all day, be told things they already knew in their view, and that'll cost you £400 or £500 each, then come away again. That's an expensive way to do CPD. I am a very active person in terms of my own CPD, but I spent nothing other than pens, bit of paper to write on, time, that's the key thing, time to watch videos, to read, but not cost incurring things. As a self-employed person, you are too, I begrudge spending hundreds of pounds. I just don't do it on something which I don't think has value to me, but doing things that I drive myself, doing things I feel meet my needs, is ironically, in my humble opinion, a stronger form of CPD that impacts on the competence of me, the individual, than sat on a chair earning CPD points but having no value.
Yeah, the other sort of way I look at it is at a sort of organizational level. How can you enable sort of meaningful CPD to support, not just the profession, but
Yes.
to support the organization? So
Absolutely.
again, I mean, just go back to the teaching example.
Yeah.
What I ironically see is, having sort of seen the teachers who, they know what's wrong and what needs to be fixed in within their sort of profession at school level or college level. Then what happens is CPD is factored in, because in the UK we had something that used to be called Baker Days when
Yes, I
Baker was
remember
the
Baker Days.
education minister.
People used to come up to me if I did a presentation, want me to sign their little booklet.
Yeah, yeah. So it was always allocated as a day, I think, a
Yes.
term, and it still, survives.
Ken Baker, he was
Yeah,
the Secretary of State for Education.
Secretary of State of Education. That's right. And so so Baker Days became instituted, and they're still here. They call them CPD days, but it is usually a day, and it's usually sort of the first day of term. And usually, what I've seen happening is a discussion goes on amongst the senior leadership team.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what shall we do for CPD? And they can't kind of think of something. So maybe we should get the speaker that we had last term in to come and do another one of their sessions.
Yeah.
And it's because I think they are, ironically, given they're an educational organization, they're kind of locked into a particular constraining way of viewing CPD, as it has to be a subject matter expert who will come and give them a 40-minute talk, and then they can maybe break into groups, discuss it a bit if they're lucky. Whereas actually what they should be doing is having those CPD discussions around the issues that are otherwise discussed in the pub on a Friday.
Maybe one of our pet shared topics, maybe running action learning sets, much more meaningful, much more directly valuable.
It's the action learning principle, certainly. Whether you call it an action learning set or not doesn't matter. But I think effectively that's what was going on in the pub. It was a kind of action learning set to some extent, but it wasn't actually necessarily linking to action. So they were bringing a problem or an issue to a group. Socially, they were discussing it.
Yes.
Intellectually, they were solving it, but actually they weren't, because they felt culturally constrained, able to, turn their great ideas into action.
Well, we can get very anecdotal on this, and it doesn't hurt to do so. And we're aging ourselves horribly when we start talking about conservative education ministers under Thatcher. But I think what worries me more than the past is the future. Are we going to get more of the same? And I fear and suspect that we will. I think that professional bodies and professionals within them and the other stakeholder organizations that employ many professionals are stuck in this mode of structured, not needs-driven, process-driven CPD, which I regret to say has very often, I'll qualify it, too little value.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends what one's objective is. Whether your objective or my objective is to try and help change the game around CPD, and I have tried in some sectors, and I guess where I've had more success is where it has been working with what I would call more of an emerging or a new professional field.
Yeah, good point.
So, we're not kind of hidebound by the history and the tradition and the kind of argument that we can't do things like that because this is the way we've always done it.
Because we haven't done it for very long.
Yeah, that's right. So they're actually, you've got an opportunity to, take a new, professional field or area and to work with people in a more innovative way from the off.
But equally, Richard, I think you're right, not only in terms of the longevity of a professional body, but also the people within it. Is it easier, is it possible to get a 23, 24-year-old recently qualified person to maintain a journey of development rather than try and turn around the embedded and very often anti-views of a 56-year-old, leave me alone, I've only got 4 more years to go, you haven't given me much to do up to now, where the hell did this CPD enforcement come from? I think maintaining the journey of younger people, and I'm not trying to be ageist, there were just as many people who shut down an interest in their development profession otherwise at 23 probably as doing the 50s, and I don't want to be unfair to people like me who are 60. I just have this innate view that if we can maintain the momentum of a journey, it's easier than trying to row back the habits of a professional lifetime.
Sure, and I subscribe to a lot of this kind of thinking around, how people's roles and modes change and evolve over their career and lifetime, and maybe to really sort of give value, and a sense of contribution to the person who's maybe a few years from retirement you know, and, you know, in an organizational sense, sharing learning through generations. You know, the people at that end of their career, you know, their role, you know, in terms of their CPD, their professional development, is helping them to become really good mentors, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or really good coaches. I mean, particularly mentors, because, you know, mentoring for me is about, you know, helping people navigate the politics, learning about the things that you can't necessarily learn through the, you know, the graduate training course, but actually are really important for, you know, the lessons of life that people have. So I think, you know, you know, if we could change the game and the way that professional development is viewed, there's a lot that can be done, you know, for both the, you know, the individuals, but also for the organisation.
Well, I think so. And it is easy to become cynical, and it's a hard beast to move because it's just such a big, cumbersome beast with embedded parts. And for me, CPD, let's just as we get near the end of what we got time for here, let's just revisit what it means. Continuous professional development, not intermittent training course attendance, which is what I think it's become. If it's continuous, it should be just that, not just, oh, crikey, oh, good job, I've only got to do 3 of these a year, and I can just put up with that. Continuous, every hour of every day has got learning within it. So to encourage members to see that value intrinsically from what we do. Professional, yes, and to me, personal, professional, there is no distinction, because if you're learning, you can transfer across. And development, not training. Development, competence, not training course attendance.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's learning, you know, development or learning, you know, rather than training. And I guess, you know, there's a lot that, you know, has been changing over recent years, you know, and in the current circumstances, really, in the middle of, you know, lockdown and the pandemic, where people are being forced to learn differently. So we're learning to learn differently. And actually finding that we can do it differently. So a lot of professions are finding that they can do things differently. You know, medics who have, you know, clinical medics, for instance, who have in the past said, no, you know, we couldn't possibly do this remotely, are finding that they can do certain things remotely. City traders are finding that they can get more done by doing their trading, you know, when they're working remotely.
Absolutely.
You know, you're seeing it in the legal profession, where
do you think it's possible that we could see continuous professional development viewed with a greater, as I want so much, a greater emphasis on informal, less structured, more self-driven activity?
I think well, I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that, you know, this is a positive that can come out of the adversity that we're all going through, that people have been shaken up sufficiently to realize that you can learn in different ways. And that maybe, you know, those more visionary learning and development people and trainers and consultants, etc., educators,
the supply side of learning,
but that they can take a sort of different stance perhaps from that which has been predominant in the past, and actually you know, follow the learning, actually follow the action and follow the learning. So it doesn't actually matter too much, you know, where it's happening. In fact, yes, it may well be happening at home, or it might be happening in the workplace, or it might be happening, you know, out there in an engagement with a client. But, you know, recognizing that it all counts, you know, it's all learning, which is, you know, rooted in the job that they're doing.
I hate yes butting because I don't like doing that. So I won't yes but. I'll maintain my positive aspiration. I guess the challenge in making that happen is it moves stakeholders on the supply side a long way away from that position they've enjoyed for a long time, not just in CPD terms, but in terms of creating learning. If your worth is felt by yourself of what you do, what you instruct, what wisdom you pass on, there's a big shift to move into a guider and a more informal, a more subtle, and a more skilled role of being somebody who supports others while they do their own learning, and move away from pushing too hard on the supply side and encouraging the demand side of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a shift towards, being less prescriptive in telling you what you're going to learn. I mean, we got stuck into this rut that has sort of pervaded a lot of education, including, management education at postgrad level. And I've, on occasions been part of this, where, you have to try and define the objectives of what somebody's going to learn, way before you actually even find the learners. And as you know, my sort of action learning kind of hat on, I'd be seeing it sort of quite differently, that, quite often we don't know what people are going to learn until they've learned it. But what we're doing is helping them to make sure that there is some learning, that it's relevant and based on the issues that they're working on.
And let's be fair to professional bodies, because that's really, to a large degree, what this whole discussion is about. There wouldn't be CPD without professional bodies. Let's be fair, to do that genuinely at an individual level is virtually impossible, unless an environment somehow, and I'm being fanciful here, I don't know what the answers are, unless an environment could be found in which it was encouraged, at least, that people find their own ways. There's legitimate that people find their own ways, and people challenge the value of sitting on a chair for a day for no value.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's going to change. I mean,
years, Richard.
like yourself, Andrew. I'm optimistic, and really, great discussion that we've been, I think, sort of, getting into, and I think there's more discussion to be had. But I think, I think I'm optimistic that there is going to be a significant shift. And maybe for it's not about obsessing with trying to change the traditional profession so much, but actually for me I would take an appreciative approach of finding where is the energy and the interest, and it may be, for me, it's the sort of emerging professional fields, and introducing the approach that we've been describing, as a way of thinking and a way of developing people.
It's disappointingly radical. Disappointing in that we could have been having this conversation, and we have been 25 years ago.
Yes. But like a lot of things coming out of this pandemic crisis, I think there will be, people are talking about, what's the new normal going to be? Well, actually, we don't know, but we're all trying to work it out.
Yes.
But I'm pretty sure it is going to be different to how it was in the past. And actually, I think with that, readiness, if you like, for people to, change the way that they do their work, the way that they study, the way that they learn. There's some great opportunities.
There are.
So, Andrew, thank you very much for your views and stimulating discussion on this. I'm sure
not everyone always thanks me for my views, Richard.
It's been a great discussion. Okay,
thank you.
Cheers.
And it